Welcome to another SF non-fiction book summary. I'm your host, Sam Fury, and in this episode, we are summarizing The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli explores common cognitive biases and errors in human decision-making. It offers practical insights and strategies to help readers recognize and overcome these biases, ultimately improving their ability to make clearer and more rational decisions in various aspects of life. Chapter 1. Survivorship Bias. Survivorship bias is the logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process, while overlooking those that did not, often leading to false conclusions. For example, focusing only on successful companies for business lessons while ignoring failed ones can give a skewed view of success factors. To guard against this bias, it's important to look at the entire set of examples, including those that failed. Analyzing both successes and failures provides a more balanced and realistic understanding of what influences outcomes. Chapter 2. Swimmer's body illusion. The swimmer's body illusion refers to mistaking a result for a cause, assuming that certain qualities or characteristics inherently lead to specific outcomes. For example, believing that attending a prestigious university inherently makes someone smarter, rather than considering that smarter students might be more likely to get into such universities. To guard against this illusion, critically assess the direction of causality in situations. Consider whether qualities are truly causes of an outcome, or if they might instead be the result of other factors. This helps in forming more accurate judgments and expectations. Chapter 3. Clustering Illusion. The clustering illusion is the tendency to see patterns in random events, leading to incorrect assumptions and conclusions. For example, if a person sees a sequence of coin flips resulting in heads multiple times in a row, they might erroneously believe there's a pattern or trend, despite it being random. To guard against this illusion, remind yourself of the role of randomness in events and resist the urge to find patterns where none exist. Statistical thinking and understanding probability can help in discerning true patterns from random occurrences. Chapter 4. Social proof. Social proof is the tendency to mimic the actions of others in an attempt to reflect correct behavior for a given situation. For example, if you see many people buying a particular brand of smartphone, you might be inclined to buy the same brand, assuming it's the best choice. To guard against social proof, make decisions based on your own needs and research rather than just following the crowd. Evaluating the actual value and relevance of a choice to your personal situation helps in making more informed and independent decisions. Chapter 5. Sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy involves continuing a project or investment due to already invested resources, time, money, effort, rather than current value or potential. For example, continuing to fund a failing business because of the amount already invested, rather than cutting losses and moving on to more viable opportunities. To guard against this fallacy, make decisions based on future value and potential, not past investments. Regularly reassessing projects objectively without emotional attachment to past inputs can aid in making more rational choices. Chapter 6. Reciprocity. Reciprocity refers to the human tendency to feel obliged to return favors, gifts, or actions even when unsolicited. For example, if a colleague buys you lunch, you might feel compelled to pay for theirs next time, even if you didn't ask for the initial gesture. To guard against undue influence from reciprocity, be aware of this natural inclination and make conscious decisions based on your genuine willingness and ability to reciprocate rather than feeling obligated to do so. Chapter 7. Confirmation Bias. 1. Confirmation bias 1 is the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms one's preconceptions, leading to biased thinking. For example, if you believe a particular diet is healthiest, you might only notice and remember studies that support this view, while ignoring contradictory evidence. To guard against this, actively seek out and consider information that challenges your beliefs. Being open to opposing viewpoints and critically analyzing all evidence can help maintain a more balanced and accurate perspective. Chapter 8. Confirmation. Bias 2. Confirmation bias also involves ignoring information that contradicts existing beliefs. An example of this is seen in political beliefs. For instance, a person who strongly supports a particular political party may consistently ignore or dismiss news reports, studies, or facts that portray their favored party or its policies in a negative light. Despite the availability of this conflicting information, their pre-existing beliefs lead them to focus only on data that supports their political stance, while disregarding any evidence that challenges it. To guard against it, practice open-mindedness, give equal weight to all relevant information, and be willing to adjust beliefs when presented with new, contradictory evidence. Chapter 9. Authority bias. Authority bias is the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure, regardless of its content. For example, if a famous athlete endorses a health supplement, people may believe it's beneficial solely because of the athlete's endorsement, not based on scientific evidence. To guard against this, evaluate information based on its own merits and evidence, rather than the status of the person endorsing it. Being critical and seeking factual scientific validation helps in making more informed decisions. Chapter 10. Contrast effect. The contrast effect occurs when the evaluation of something is influenced by comparisons with recently encountered different stimuli. For example, after looking at very expensive cars, a moderately priced car might seem surprisingly affordable, even though its price hasn't changed. To guard against this, make decisions based on absolute values and standards, not relative comparisons. Evaluating options in isolation and considering long-term value and relevance helps in avoiding skewed judgments due to contrast. Chapter 11. Availability bias. Availability bias is the tendency to overestimate the importance or likelihood of information that is readily available or recent. For example, after hearing about a plane crash, you might overestimate the risk of flying, even though statistically it's very safe. To guard against this, seek comprehensive, objective data to inform judgments, rather than relying on immediate, emotionally charged, or easily recalled examples. This helps in forming more accurate perceptions based on broader evidence. Chapter 12. It'll get worse. Before it gets better fallacy. The "it'll get worse before it gets better" fallacy is the mistaken belief that a situation must deteriorate further before improving, often leading to unnecessary endurance or suffering. For example, someone may continue an ineffective medical treatment, thinking their condition must worsen before it can get better, despite contrary evidence. To guard against this fallacy, decisions should be based on empirical evidence and expert advice, rather than on this misleading adage. Regularly re-evaluating situations and being open to alternative approaches can help in avoiding unnecessary perseverance in unproductive or harmful scenarios. Chapter 13. Story bias. Story bias is the inclination to understand and make sense of the world through stories, often at the expense of complex realities and facts. For example, a dramatic news story about a rare event might lead you to believe it's common, overshadowing statistical evidence of its rarity. To guard against this, focus on factual data and statistical evidence rather than getting swayed by compelling narratives. Recognizing that stories are often simplified representations of reality helps in maintaining a more accurate and nuanced understanding of the world. Chapter 14. Hindsight Bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to see past events as having been predictable and expected after they have occurred. For example, after a stock market crash, many claim they saw it coming, even though it was not predicted by most experts beforehand. To guard against this, acknowledge the unpredictability of events and the limits of foresight. Keeping a record of your predictions versus actual outcomes can help in recognizing the frequent discrepancy between expectation and reality. Chapter 15. Overconfidence Bias. Overconfidence bias is the tendency to overestimate one's abilities, leading to unrealistic expectations and risky decisions. For example, a driver might believe they can safely text while driving, overestimating their multitasking skills, which increases the risk of accidents. To guard against this, regularly seek feedback and review outcomes of past decisions. Acknowledging and learning from mistakes helps in maintaining a more realistic assessment of capabilities and risks. Chapter 16. Chauffeur Knowledge. Chauffeur knowledge refers to superficial understanding, where a person can talk eloquently on a topic without truly comprehending its depth. For example, a person might use complex financial terms and sound knowledgeable about investing, but lacks deep understanding of financial principles. To guard against this, focus on truly understanding subjects rather than just memorizing facts or jargon. Seeking depth and clarity in knowledge and admitting when you don't know something helps in differentiating real understanding from mere surface knowledge. Chapter 17. Illusion of control. Illusion of control is the tendency to overestimate one's influence over external events, leading to a false sense of control. For example, a gambler might believe that their skill or ritual influences the outcome of a game of chance, despite it being entirely random. To guard against this, recognize the limits of your control and the role of randomness in many situations. Distinguishing between what you can and cannot influence helps in making more realistic decisions and assessments. Chapter 18. Incentive super response tendency. Incentive super response tendency describes how strong incentives can overwhelmingly drive behaviors, sometimes leading to unintended consequences. For example, if a company rewards employees solely for sales volume without considering customer satisfaction, employees might prioritize sales over service quality, leading to short-term gains but long-term customer relationship issues. To guard against this, design incentive systems that are well-balanced and consider a range of desired outcomes. Ensure that incentives align with broader goals and values to avoid narrow, counterproductive behaviors. Chapter 19. Regression to mean. Regression to mean is the statistical phenomenon where extreme cases tend to be followed by more average ones, often misinterpreted as a causal relationship. For example, a sports player has an outstanding performance one week and a mediocre one the next, which is often just a return to average. To guard against misinterpreting this, recognize that extreme performances are often outliers and that a return to average performance is statistically normal. Avoid attributing these changes to luck, skill changes, or other external factors without sufficient evidence. Chapter 20. Outcome bias. Outcome bias is the tendency to judge a decision by its eventual outcome rather than the quality of the decision at the time it was made. For example, praising a risky financial investment that luckily succeeds while ignoring the unsound decision-making behind it. To guard against this, evaluate decisions based on the information and reasoning available at the time rather than their outcomes. This approach encourages better decision-making processes, independent of results. Chapter 21. The Paradox of Choice. The paradox of choice suggests that having too many options can lead to dissatisfaction and indecision, contrary to the belief that more choices increase happiness. For example, feeling overwhelmed and unable to choose when faced with a vast array of toothpaste brands in a supermarket. To guard against this, limit your options to a manageable number by setting clear criteria for what you need. This simplifies decision-making and can increase satisfaction with your choice. Chapter 22. Liking bias. Liking bias is the tendency to agree with or believe people whom we like, often compromising objective judgment. For example, if a friend recommends a product, you might be more inclined to buy it, trusting their judgment more because of your personal relationship. To guard against this, strive to separate personal feelings towards individuals from the objective assessment of their opinions or suggestions. Making decisions based on facts and evidence rather than personal affections helps in maintaining objectivity. Chapter 23. Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is the tendency to overvalue things simply because we own them. For example, you might think a coffee mug you own is worth more than its actual market value simply because it's yours. To guard against this, try to objectively assess the value of your possessions, considering what you would realistically pay for them if you didn't own them. This helps in making more rational decisions about buying and selling items. Chapter 24. Coincidence. Coincidence refers to a remarkable concurrence of events or circumstances without apparent causal connection. For example, if you randomly think of an old friend and then unexpectedly bump into them the same day, it's a coincidence, a chance occurrence without underlying causation. To guard against over-interpreting coincidences, recognize the role of randomness and the high probability of occasional surprising matches in a world full of events. Avoid attributing deep meaning or patterns to these random occurrences. Chapter 25. Groupthink. Groupthink is the phenomenon where the desire for harmony or conformity in a group leads to irrational or dysfunctional decision-making. For example, a team at work might agree to a flawed plan because no one wants to disrupt the consensus or appear disagreeable. To guard against groupthink, encourage open dialogue and dissent in group settings. Cultivating an environment where diverse opinions are valued and critical evaluation is welcomed can help in making more balanced and effective decisions. Chapter 26. Neglect of probability. Neglect of probability is the tendency to disregard or undervalue the likelihood of events, often leading to poor decision-making. For example, worrying excessively about plane crashes, a very rare event, while ignoring everyday risks like car accidents. To guard against this, actively consider and weigh the actual probabilities of different events. Educating oneself about statistical likelihoods can help in making more rational decisions and assessments. Chapter 27. Scarcity error. Scarcity error refers to the tendency to value things more highly when they are perceived as rare or in short supply. For example, you might rush to buy a product due to a limited time offer, fearing you'll miss out, even if you don't need it. To guard against this, question the true value and necessity of items beyond their scarcity. Consider if your desire is driven by actual need or just the fear of missing out. This helps in making more thoughtful and rational purchasing decisions. Chapter 28. Base rate neglect. Base rate neglect is the tendency to ignore general information, base rates, in favor of specifics, leading to distorted judgment. For example, overestimating the likelihood of winning the lottery based on stories of winners, while ignoring the much larger number of participants who don't win. To guard against this, consciously integrate broader base rate information into your decision-making process. This broader perspective helps in forming more accurate assessments and expectations. Chapter 29. Gambler's Fallacy. Gambler's fallacy is the mistaken belief that past random events affect the likelihood of future ones in independent situations. For example, thinking a coin is due to land on heads after several tails in a row, despite each flip being independent and having equal chances. To guard against this, remember that in independent random events like coin flips or lottery draws, each event is unaffected by previous outcomes. Understanding the nature of probability and randomness helps in making more rational predictions and decisions. Chapter 30. The Anchor. The anchor refers to the human tendency to rely heavily on the first piece of information, the anchor, when making decisions. For example, if a seller prices an item at $100 and then offers it for $50, you might perceive it as a bargain, influenced by the initial higher price. To guard against this, consciously question initial information and compare it with other data points. Researching and considering multiple perspectives helps in making decisions less influenced by anchoring biases. Chapter 31. Induction. Induction is the process of making generalizations based on specific observations, which can lead to incorrect conclusions if the observations are not representative. For example, if all swans you've seen are white, you might conclude all swans are white, which is disproved by the existence of black swans. To guard against the pitfalls of induction, recognize that observations may not represent the whole picture. Seek out additional information and be open to revising beliefs when new, contradictory evidence is presented. Chapter 32. Loss aversion. Loss aversion refers to the psychological phenomenon where people prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent gains. This means the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. For example, a person might refuse to sell a stock at a loss, even though holding on to it might lead to greater losses. This is because the immediate pain of realizing a loss feels more significant than potential future losses. To guard against loss aversion, one can practice viewing decisions in terms of potential gains and losses, emphasizing long-term benefits over short-term emotional reactions. It's also helpful to establish preset rules for decision-making to reduce emotional bias. Chapter 33. Social loafing. Social loafing is the tendency of individuals to exert less effort when working in a group than when working alone. For example, in a group project, a member might contribute less, assuming others will pick up the slack, leading to an overall decrease in group productivity. To guard against social loafing, it's effective to assign clear individual responsibilities within a group and ensure each member's contributions are visible and acknowledged. This creates accountability and motivates everyone to participate actively. Chapter 34. Exponential growth. Exponential growth refers to a process where the quantity increases at a rate proportional to its current value, leading to rapid escalation over time. For example, if a population of rabbits doubles every year, starting from just 2, it exponentially grows to 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on each year. To guard against the pitfalls of underestimating exponential growth, it's important to understand its nature and anticipate its rapid escalation. Regular reassessment and long-term planning are key in contexts where exponential growth occurs, like investments or population studies. Chapter 35. Winner's Curse. The winner's curse describes a situation where the winner of an auction ends up overpaying or suffering a loss due to the competitive nature of the bidding process. For example, in a real estate auction, a bidder might win a property by significantly outbidding others, only to find the property's actual value is much lower than their bid. To guard against the winner's curse, it's crucial to set a maximum bid based on thorough research and stick to it, avoiding getting caught up in the heat of the moment. This disciplined approach helps in making rational decisions based on value, not competition. Chapter 36. Fundamental Attribution Error. The fundamental attribution error is the tendency to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors when judging others' behavior. For example, if someone is late to a meeting, you might think they are irresponsible, disregarding possible external factors like traffic or an emergency that caused their delay. To guard against this error, it's important to consider external circumstances affecting people's actions. Being empathetic and open-minded about the various factors that can influence behavior helps in making more accurate and fair assessments of others. Chapter 37. False Causality. False causality refers to the incorrect assumption that a relationship between two events implies that one causes the other. For example, if a person wears their lucky shirt when their favorite team wins, they might believe the shirt causes the victory, despite no real causal link. To guard against false causality, one should critically evaluate evidence and look for alternative explanations. Relying on scientific methods and statistical analysis helps discern true cause and effect relationships from mere coincidences. Chapter 38. Halo Effect. The halo effect is the tendency to let one admirable trait of a person positively influence one's overall impression of them. For example, if a public figure is exceptionally attractive, people might also perceive them as more intelligent or trustworthy, despite no actual correlation. To guard against the halo effect, it's crucial to consciously separate individual traits and judge each on its own merit. One should actively question initial impressions and seek objective evidence before forming overall judgments about people or things. Chapter 39. Alternative Paths. Alternative paths refers to the idea that different approaches or methods can lead to the same outcome or goal. For example, achieving success in a career can be done through various means: academic excellence, networking, innovation, or a unique combination of skills and opportunities. To effectively navigate through alternative paths, it's important to remain flexible and open-minded, recognizing that there is no single right way to achieve a goal. Embracing diverse strategies and adapting to changing circumstances can optimize the journey towards desired outcomes. Chapter 40. Forecast Illusion. The forecast illusion is the tendency to overestimate the accuracy of predictions or forecasts, often ignoring uncertainty and randomness. For example, an investor might trust a financial expert's market predictions as certain, leading to risky investments based on these forecasts, despite the inherent unpredictability of financial markets. To guard against the forecast illusion, it's essential to maintain skepticism towards predictions, understand the limits of forecasting, and consider a range of possible outcomes. Diversifying decisions and preparing for various scenarios can mitigate the risk of relying too heavily on uncertain forecasts. Chapter 41. Forecast Illusion. The forecast illusion is the overconfidence in and over-reliance on the accuracy of forecasts, especially in complex, uncertain situations. For example, a weather forecast predicts a sunny day, leading a family to plan an outdoor picnic. However, the day turns out to be rainy, disrupting their plans. This shows the unpredictability and limitations of forecasts. To guard against the forecast illusion, acknowledge the inherent uncertainties in predictions. Diversify decision-making strategies by considering multiple scenarios and avoid basing important decisions solely on forecasts. Adaptability and flexibility in planning are key to mitigating the risks associated with reliance on predictions. Chapter 42. Framing. Framing is the influence of presentation or context on how information is perceived and decisions are made. The same information can lead to different conclusions based on how it's framed or presented. For example, describing a glass as half full versus half empty influences people's perception of the situation, with half full suggesting optimism, and half empty, suggesting pessimism, despite describing the same reality. To guard against framing effects, be aware of how information is presented and consciously consider alternative framings. Seek objective data and multiple perspectives to ensure decisions are based on substance rather than presentation. Chapter 43. Action Bias. Action bias is the preference for action over inaction, often driven by the desire to control events or situations. For example, a football goalkeeper might dive to one side during a penalty kick, even though statistically staying in the center often yields better results. This action is driven by the feeling that doing something is better than doing nothing. To guard against action bias, pause to evaluate the effectiveness of potential actions versus inaction. Consider the benefits and drawbacks of both, and make decisions based on rational analysis rather than the impulse to simply do something. Chapter 44. Omission Bias. Omission bias is the tendency to favor inaction over action, especially when the latter leads to negative outcomes, even if the inaction has a similar or worse result. For example, a person might avoid vaccinating their child due to fear of side effects, despite the greater risk of serious illness from not vaccinating. To guard against omission bias, evaluate actions and inactions on equal footing, considering their potential outcomes. Make decisions based on rational assessment of risks and benefits, rather than irrational fears or misconceptions about taking action. Chapter 45. Self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is attributing success to personal factors while blaming external factors for failures. For example, a student who gets a good grade might credit their intelligence and hard work, but blame the teacher or bad luck for a poor grade, despite similar effort levels in both instances. To guard against this bias, practice self-awareness and humility, recognizing both internal and external factors in successes and failures. Reflect objectively on your actions and their outcomes, fostering a balanced view of personal responsibility. Chapter 46. Hedonic Treadmill. The hedonic treadmill is the tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness, regardless of major positive or negative events. For example, a person might feel a surge of happiness after getting a promotion, but soon returns to their usual level of contentment despite the improved circumstances. To guard against the hedonic treadmill, focus on long-term fulfillment rather than short-term pleasures. Cultivate gratitude, mindfulness, and find joy in everyday experiences rather than constantly seeking external sources of happiness. This helps maintain a more stable, enduring sense of well-being. Chapter 47. Self-selection bias. Self-selection bias is the distortion in results when participants in a study or situation are not randomly chosen, but select themselves. For example, a survey conducted on a fitness website about exercise habits might show high activity levels, but this reflects the website's audience, not the general population. To guard against self-selection bias, ensure diverse and random sampling in studies and evaluations. Be cautious in interpreting results from non-random samples, considering the potential biases introduced by the nature of the sample selection. Chapter 48. Association bias. Association bias is the tendency to connect events or concepts based on familiarity or a perceived relationship, even when no such link exists. For example, assuming a person is kind because they have a friendly face illustrates association bias, as appearance and personality are not necessarily related. To guard against this bias, question intuitive connections and seek factual evidence for any assumed associations. Practice critical thinking and avoid making judgments based solely on superficial or unrelated traits. Chapter 49. Beginner's luck. Beginner's luck refers to an inexperienced person unusually succeeding in their initial attempt at a task, often attributed to chance rather than skill. For example, a person playing a card game for the first time might win against experienced players, being perceived as having beginner's luck. To guard against overvaluing beginner's luck, recognize the role of chance in initial successes and maintain realistic expectations for future performance. Focus on skill development rather than relying on luck to repeat. Chapter 50. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort experienced when holding contradictory beliefs or when behavior conflicts with beliefs. For example, a person who values health but smokes may experience cognitive dissonance, as their action, smoking, conflicts with their belief, valuing health. To guard against cognitive dissonance, strive for consistency in beliefs and actions. When confronted with dissonance, objectively evaluate your beliefs and behaviors, and be willing to adjust either to align them more closely. This can involve changing habits or re-examining and modifying beliefs. Chapter 51. Hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting is the tendency to prefer smaller, immediate rewards over larger future benefits, often leading to irrational short-term choices. For example, choosing to watch TV instead of studying for an important exam illustrates hyperbolic discounting, as the immediate pleasure overrides the more significant future benefit of studying. To guard against hyperbolic discounting, focus on long-term goals and consequences of actions. Practice delaying gratification and consider the future implications of present choices. Making plans and setting goals can help align immediate actions with long-term aspirations. Chapter 52. Because justification. Because justification is the tendency to accept explanations and requests more readily when they include the word because, even if the reason given is weak or irrelevant. For example, a person might be more willing to let someone cut in line if they say, "Can I go first because I'm in a hurry?" regardless of the actual urgency of their need. To guard against this, critically evaluate reasons and requests, focusing on their actual validity rather than being swayed by the mere presence of a justification. Question the logic and necessity behind explanations, especially those that hinge on weak or irrelevant because rationales. Chapter 53. Decision fatigue. Decision fatigue is the deteriorating quality of decisions made after a long session of decision-making. For example, after a day of making numerous business decisions, an executive might choose the easiest, not the best, option in a late afternoon meeting due to depleted mental energy. To guard against decision fatigue, make important decisions when fresh, limit the number of decisions made consecutively, and simplify choices where possible. Regular breaks, good nutrition, and adequate rest also help maintain decision-making stamina. Chapter 54. Contagion bias. Contagion bias is the irrational belief that objects or people can transfer their qualities to others through association or contact. For example, a person might refuse to wear a sweater previously owned by someone they dislike, believing the negative traits of the former owner will transfer to them. To guard against contagion bias, recognize and challenge irrational beliefs about the transfer of qualities. Base judgments on objective qualities and facts, rather than superstitions or unfounded associations. Chapter 55. The problem with averages. The problem with averages is the misleading nature of averages in representing individual cases, often hiding variations and extremes. For example, if 10 people have an average wealth of $1 million, this doesn't mean each person is a millionaire. One could be a billionaire, with the rest having much less. To guard against this, look beyond averages to understand data distributions, including extremes and variances. Consider individual cases and context, and avoid generalizing from averages to specific instances. Chapter 56. Motivation crowding. Motivation. Crowding occurs when external incentives or pressures diminish intrinsic motivation. For example, A child who loves drawing might lose interest if they start getting paid for their artwork, shifting their motivation from enjoyment to earning money. To guard against motivation crowding, balance intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. Encourage activities for their inherent value and satisfaction, not just for external rewards or recognition. Chapter 57, Twaddle Tendency. Twaddle tendency is the inclination to add meaningless or trivial information or opinions, often to appear more knowledgeable or authoritative. For example, in meetings, some people might speak at length without adding value, just to seem active or important. To guard against twaddle tendency, focus on clarity and brevity in communication. Value substance over volume and encourage environments where contributions are meaningful and concise. Practice self-awareness to recognize and reduce unnecessary or unproductive input. Chapter 58, Will Rogers Phenomenon. The Will Rogers phenomenon refers to statistical illusions caused by shifting elements between sets, which paradoxically raises the average of both sets. For example, if a low-scoring student moves from a high-achieving class to a lower-achieving one, the average of both classes increases, despite no change in overall performance. To guard against it, be cautious in interpreting statistical changes, especially when elements are reclassified. Look for underlying causes of shifts in averages and consider the broader context, not just the immediate statistical outcome. Chapter 59, Information Bias. Information bias is the tendency to seek more information than necessary to make a decision, often leading to analysis paralysis. For example, a person may delay buying a car by endlessly researching models and features, despite having enough information to make an informed choice. To guard against information bias, identify the essential information needed for a decision and avoid excessive data gathering. Set clear criteria and limits for research, and practice making decisions with available, sufficient information. Chapter 60, Effort Justification. Effort justification is valuing an outcome more highly if significant effort was invested, regardless of the actual worth. For example, someone might overvalue a piece of furniture they struggled to assemble themselves, believing the effort makes it more valuable. To guard against effort justification, assess outcomes based on objective criteria, separate from the effort involved. Acknowledge the effort, but evaluate the result on its own merits, preventing overestimation due to personal investment. Chapter 61, The Law of Small Numbers. The law of small numbers is the error of drawing broad conclusions from small samples. For example, if a new restaurant gets a few excellent reviews initially, one might wrongly conclude it's the best in town, even though the sample size is too small to be representative. To guard against this, seek larger, more representative samples before forming conclusions. Understand the limitations of small data sets and resist the urge to generalize from them. Chapter 62, Expectations. Expectations refer to preconceived notions or beliefs about future events or outcomes, which can significantly influence perception and satisfaction. For example, expecting a movie to be outstanding based on reviews may lead to disappointment if it's just average, despite it being enjoyable with no prior expectations. To guard against the influence of expectations, try to approach situations with an open mind, without preconceived notions. Evaluate experiences based on their actual merits, not against pre-built standards or assumptions. Chapter 63, Simple Logic. Simple logic refers to the inclination to prefer straightforward explanations or solutions, often overlooking more complex but accurate reasoning. For example, a person might attribute their headache to stress alone, ignoring other potential factors like dehydration or lack of sleep, because stress is a simpler explanation. To guard against this, it's important to consider multiple factors and avoid jumping to conclusions. Being open to complexity and seeking comprehensive explanations can lead to a more accurate understanding of situations and problems. Chapter 64. Fourier Effect. The Fourier effect is the tendency to perceive vague general statements as highly accurate for oneself, despite them being applicable to a wide range of people. For example, horoscopes often contain broad descriptions that individuals believe accurately describe their unique personality or life situation. To guard against the Fourier effect, critically evaluate the specificity and evidence behind claims. Recognize the allure of generic statements and be skeptical of their personal applicability, especially when they lack concrete, individualized information. Chapter 65. Volunteer's Folly. Volunteer's folly refers to the inefficiency of volunteering for tasks where one's skills are not best utilized, especially when their professional work could generate more value or resources for the same cause. For example, if a high-earning professional spends time on unskilled volunteer work, they could have instead worked extra hours professionally and donated the earnings, generating more benefit for the cause. To guard against volunteer's folly, one should evaluate their unique skills and how best to use them for a cause. If their professional work can generate more value than their direct volunteering, it may be more effective to donate resources earned from their profession. Chapter 66. Affect Heuristic. The affect heuristic is the tendency to make decisions based on emotions and feelings rather than objective analysis. For example, a person might choose a job because it feels right, despite it offering lower pay and fewer career opportunities than another option. To guard against the affect heuristic, strive for balanced decision-making by considering both emotional responses and factual data. Acknowledge your feelings, but also critically evaluate the practical aspects and potential outcomes of decisions. Chapter 67. Introspection Illusion. The introspection. Illusion is overestimating one's ability to understand and predict their own behavior and motives. For example, a person might believe they will remain calm in a high-stress situation, but when actually faced with it, they react with panic or anger. To guard against this illusion, acknowledge the complexity and unpredictability of human behavior, including your own. Be open to feedback and external perspectives and recognize that self-awareness has limitations. Chapter 68. Inability to close doors. The inability to close doors is the reluctance to abandon options or projects, even when they're no longer beneficial. For example, continuing an unprofitable business venture because of the time and money already invested, instead of cutting losses and moving on to more promising opportunities. To guard against this, regularly reevaluate commitments and be willing to let go of those that no longer serve a beneficial purpose. Focus on future potential rather than past investments. Chapter 69. Neomania. Neomania is the obsession with novelty, often favoring new things over proven, existing ones. For example, constantly upgrading to the latest smartphone model, regardless of whether the new features offer any substantial improvement over the previous version. To guard against neomania, evaluate new things based on actual needs and benefits, not just their novelty. Consider the value and utility of existing options before pursuing the latest trends or innovations. Chapter 70. Sleeper Effect. The sleeper effect refers to the phenomenon where a message initially disregarded due to an untrustworthy source gains credibility over time, as the source's unreliability is forgotten while the message is remembered. For example, a person might initially dismiss a health tip from a discredited website. However, weeks later, they might recall the tip without remembering the dubious source and begin to believe it. To guard against this effect, it's important to always consider the source of information and maintain a critical mindset. Keeping track of where and from whom you learn information can help in evaluating its reliability over time. Chapter 71. Alternative blindness. Alternative blindness is the tendency to evaluate decisions without considering all alternatives, leading to potentially suboptimal choices. For example, a person might choose to buy a car after comparing only two models, overlooking other potentially better options available in the market. To guard against this, it's important to systematically explore a range of options before making a decision, ensuring that you're not overlooking potentially better alternatives. This approach can lead to more informed and balanced decisions. Chapter 72. Social comparison bias. Social comparison bias is the inclination to compare oneself to others in ways that can lead to feelings of inferiority or superiority. For example, a person might feel inadequate after seeing a friend's luxurious vacation photos on social media, despite their own accomplishments and happiness. To guard against this bias, focus on personal goals and achievements rather than comparing with others. Cultivating gratitude for one's own life and accomplishments can help maintain a balanced perspective and reduce the impact of social comparisons. Chapter 73. Primacy and recency effects. Primacy and recency effects describe the tendency to remember the first and last items in a series better than the middle ones. For example, during a presentation, audience members are more likely to recall the points made at the beginning and end, while the middle content is less remembered. To guard against this effect, it's helpful to actively focus on and revisit the middle sections of information. Taking notes and reviewing them can aid in retaining and recalling the entire span of information more effectively. Chapter 74. Not invented here syndrome. Not invented here syndrome is a bias where individuals or organizations undervalue ideas, solutions, or products that originate externally. For example, a company may reject a superior software solution offered by an external vendor, preferring an inferior in-house developed program simply because it was created internally. To guard against this syndrome, it's important to actively encourage and value external ideas and solutions. Cultivating an open-minded culture that appreciates diversity in thought and origin can lead to more innovative and effective outcomes. Chapter 75. The Black Swan. The black swan refers to highly improbable and unpredictable events that have massive impact. For example, the sudden emergence of a global pandemic like COVID-19 was a black swan event, unforeseen by most and having profound worldwide effects. To guard against such events, it's crucial to maintain flexibility and resilience in planning and thinking. Diversifying investments, preparing for various outcomes, and not relying on predictions based solely on past events can help mitigate the impact of these rare occurrences. Chapter 76. Domain dependence. Domain dependence is the tendency to apply knowledge or skills in some areas, but fail to do so in others, despite relevance. For example, a skilled business negotiator might struggle to negotiate effectively in a personal situation, like buying a car, failing to transfer their professional skills. To guard against this, actively practice applying your knowledge and skills across different areas of life. Reflecting on different contexts where your abilities are relevant can help bridge the gap between domains. Chapter 77. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect is the tendency to overestimate how much others share our beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes. For example, a person who frequently recycles might assume that most people are equally environmentally conscious, even if this is not the case. To guard against this, it's important to actively seek out diverse perspectives and recognize that our views might not be as widely held as we believe. This can lead to a more accurate understanding of others' viewpoints and behaviors. Chapter 78. Falsification of history. Falsification of history involves altering or misrepresenting historical events to fit current beliefs or narratives. For example, a government might rewrite textbooks to portray historical events in a way that favors its current ideology, distorting the true events for future generations. To guard against this, it's essential to consult multiple, diverse sources when studying history and remain critical of biases and perspectives. Encouraging open academic discourse and protecting historical records can help preserve the integrity of historical understanding. Chapter 79. In-group, out-group bias. In-group, out-group bias is favoring people who belong to the same group as oneself over those from different groups. For example, a sports fan might irrationally support a player from their favorite team while criticizing a similar player from a rival team. To guard against this bias, it's important to consciously recognize and challenge our predispositions towards our own group. Striving for objective evaluations and empathy towards all groups can help mitigate this bias. Chapter 80. Ambiguity aversion. Ambiguity aversion is the tendency to avoid options with unknown probabilities, preferring choices with known risks. For example, an investor might choose a traditional stock with a clear performance history over a new, potentially more profitable cryptocurrency due to the uncertainty surrounding it. To guard against this, consider the potential benefits of uncertain options and try to objectively assess risks. Educating oneself about the unknown factors can also help in making more informed decisions in the face of ambiguity. Chapter 81. Default effect. The default effect is the propensity to stick with the preset or default option instead of making an active choice. For example, many people stick with their employer's default retirement fund allocation instead of customizing their investment choices. To guard against this, actively review and consider your options in any decision-making process rather than passively accepting the default. This ensures more deliberate and personalized choices. Chapter 82. Fear of regret. Fear of regret is the anxiety of making a decision that might lead to remorse or disappointment in the future. For example, someone might avoid investing in the stock market due to the fear of losing money and later regretting the decision. To guard against this, focus on making well-informed decisions based on rational analysis rather than emotions. Accepting that some degree of uncertainty and risk is inherent in most decisions can also help in managing this fear. Chapter 83. Salience effect. The salience effect is the tendency to focus on the most noticeable or emotionally striking features of an event, often at the expense of other important factors. For example, dramatic news stories may lead people to overestimate the frequency of rare events, like airplane crashes, while underestimating more common risks. To guard against this, strive for a balanced perspective by actively seeking out less dramatic but equally important information. This helps in making more accurate and less emotionally driven judgments. Chapter 84. House money effect. The house money effect describes the tendency to take greater risks with money that's perceived as easily gained or unexpected, like a windfall. For example, someone who wins money at a casino might gamble more recklessly with their winnings than they would with their regular income. To guard against this, treat all money with the same level of consideration, regardless of its source. Maintaining consistent financial decision-making principles can help in managing risk more effectively. Chapter 85. Procrastination. Procrastination is the habit of delaying tasks or decisions, often irrationally, despite potential negative consequences. For example, a student might postpone studying for an important exam until the night before, even though they know it's detrimental to their performance. To guard against procrastination, set clear goals and deadlines, break tasks into smaller steps, and create a structured schedule. Eliminating distractions and rewarding progress can also help in overcoming the tendency to delay tasks. Chapter 86. Envy. Envy is the discomfort or distress caused by desiring what others have, whether it's possessions, status, or abilities. For example, a person may feel envious seeing a colleague receive a promotion they themselves desired, even if they are otherwise content with their own career. To guard against envy, focus on personal goals and achievements and practice gratitude for what you have. Understanding that everyone's path is unique can help in appreciating your own journey without unfavorable comparisons. Chapter 87. Personification. Personification highlights the human tendency to favor engaging narrative forms of information over abstract statistical data due to their emotional and relatable nature. For example, people might be more moved by a single, compelling personal story about a natural disaster than by statistical data showing its widespread impact. To guard against this bias, it's important to seek out and consider statistical data alongside narrative accounts. Balancing emotional narratives with factual data helps in forming a more comprehensive and accurate understanding of situations. Chapter 88. Illusion of attention. The illusion of attention is the mistaken belief that our attention captures everything of importance in our field of view. For example, while focused on a smartphone screen, a person may not notice a friend waving at them from a distance, overestimating their awareness of their surroundings. To guard against this, it's important to recognize the limitations of our attention and actively broaden our focus. Regularly taking breaks from intense concentration to observe the wider environment can help improve overall awareness. Chapter 89. Strategic misrepresentation. Strategic misrepresentation involves deliberately distorting or misstating information to achieve specific objectives or advantages. For example, a salesperson might exaggerate the benefits of a product while downplaying its shortcomings to make a sale, presenting a skewed version of the truth. To guard against this, verify information from multiple sources and maintain a healthy skepticism, especially in situations where incentives for misrepresentation are high. Critical thinking and due diligence can help in discerning the accuracy of presented information. Chapter 90. Overthinking. Overthinking is the excessive analysis or rumination over decisions or situations, often leading to stress and indecision. For example, a person might spend hours deliberating over the pros and cons of two very similar options for a minor purchase, causing unnecessary anxiety. To guard against overthinking, set time limits for decision-making, focus on key factors, and accept that some uncertainty is inevitable. Practicing decisiveness in smaller matters can also build confidence in making choices more efficiently. Chapter 91. Planning fallacy. The planning fallacy is underestimating the time, costs, and risks of future actions while overestimating the benefits. For example, a person might plan a home renovation expecting it to take 1 month, only to find it actually takes 3 months and costs much more than anticipated. To guard against this, consider past similar tasks to realistically estimate time and costs. Additionally, adding a buffer for unexpected delays and expenses can lead to more accurate planning. Chapter 92. Déformation professionnelle. Déformation professionnelle is a cognitive bias where one's professional perspective overly influences how one views and interprets the world. For example, a hammer manufacturer might see every problem as solvable with a hammer, neglecting other solutions or tools. To guard against this, actively seek perspectives from various fields and remain open to different methods and ideas. This broadens one's approach to problem-solving and decision-making. Chapter 93, Zeigarnik Effect. The Zeigarnik effect discusses our tendency to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. This phenomenon is named after psychologist Bloomer Zeigarnik, who observed that waiters remembered orders only as long as the order was in the process of being served. For example, if you start doing a puzzle but leave it halfway, you are likely to remember the unfinished puzzle more vividly than one you completed a week ago. The incomplete puzzle stays in your mind, urging you to return and finish it. To guard against the Zeigarnik effect, it's important to manage tasks by setting clear goals and deadlines. Completing tasks fully before moving on to the next one can help reduce the mental clutter of unfinished work. Making detailed to-do lists and systematically ticking off completed items can also provide a sense of closure, allowing the mind to release them from active memory. Chapter 94, Illusion of Skill. Illusion of skill describes the misconception that one's abilities or expertise significantly influence outcomes, even in areas largely governed by chance. This leads to overconfidence in personal skill and underestimation of randomness. For example, a stock trader might believe they possess a unique skill for picking winning stocks, attributing their occasional successes to skill rather than market randomness. To guard against this illusion, one should acknowledge the role of chance in success, especially in fields like financial markets. Relying on statistical evidence and long-term performance data, rather than individual hunches or short-term successes, can provide a more realistic assessment of skill versus luck. Chapter 95, Feature Positive Effect. The feature positive effect refers to the tendency to focus more on the presence of a feature or information rather than its absence, often leading to skewed judgments or decisions. For example, a person might give more weight to the benefits of a medication, like pain relief, while overlooking its non-occurrence, like no side effects, leading to a biased evaluation. To guard against this, it's important to consciously consider what is not present or what has not happened in addition to what is evident. This involves evaluating all relevant information, both positive and negative, before making a decision. Chapter 96, Cherry Picking. Cherry picking describes the act of selectively choosing data or facts that support one's argument or belief, while ignoring those that contradict it. For example, a person might highlight only the positive reviews of a product they like, ignoring the negative feedback to persuade others of its quality. To guard against cherry picking, it's crucial to consider all available evidence, both supporting and contradicting. Seeking out and objectively evaluating information that challenges your views helps in forming a more balanced and accurate understanding. Chapter 97, Fallacy of the Single Cause. The fallacy of the single cause is the mistaken belief that complex events have a single cause, ignoring the possible interplay of multiple factors. For example, attributing a country's economic crisis solely to one policy decision overlooks other contributing factors like global market trends, historical context, and internal political dynamics. To guard against this fallacy, it's important to consider a range of possible causes and their interactions when analyzing complex situations. Adopting a multifaceted approach to problem solving and analysis helps in avoiding oversimplification and reaching more comprehensive understandings. Chapter 98, Intention to Treat Error. Intention to treat error occurs when the outcomes of a plan are judged based on the intention behind it rather than its actual results, often leading to misguided conclusions. For example, a government policy aimed at reducing unemployment might be deemed successful based on its good intentions, even if it fails to actually lower unemployment rates. To guard against this error, focus on the actual outcomes and impacts of actions, rather than their intentions. Evaluating real-world results and data, instead of just the theoretical or intended effects, provides a more accurate assessment of effectiveness. Chapter 99. News Illusion. News illusion describes the misconception that consuming news provides a clear and accurate understanding of the world, often leading to an overestimation of its usefulness and relevance. For example, a person might believe they are well informed about global affairs by watching daily news, but this often only offers a fragmented, sensationalized view. To guard against this illusion, seek deeper, more comprehensive sources of information, such as books or in-depth articles, which provide context and analysis beyond immediate news. Diversifying sources and critically assessing the quality and depth of information can lead to a more nuanced understanding of world events. Thanks for listening to this SF non-fiction book summary. If you have any questions or comments about it, please share them with the community. See you next time.